Welcome to bookbinding at the Clunes Book Week. We're here in the Bluestone at Clunes, enjoying the atmosphere of lots of people, lots of activity, and lots of visitors to Book Week. And if you come out now, the grounds are full of people milling around, looking at books, looking at the other entertainment, and enjoying themselves. The weather's been perfect today, and we're inside in the Bluestone and enjoying the company of a number of booksellers, a number of people like the State Library are here with rare books. And we're going to talk in this session a little about some sorts of repairs you might want to do. We have lots of inquiries here. How do I repair this book? How do you repair that book? Well, often that's how long is a piece of string? There are many, many different techniques, many ways to go about repairing books. And I thought I'd just show you some and talk about a few techniques and a few do's and don'ts that you might come across. Well, first of all, I'm going to show you a little pamphlet here and ask the question, if you had this pamphlet, what would you do with it? Now, this pamphlet has been abused somewhat, and my knife has disappeared. Has been abused somewhat. The back of it has fallen apart. It's a stapled section, so the staples are starting to go rusty, and yet it's quite a rare piece and worthy of being looked after. Now, the first thing that you look at here is it's been taped, and we never want tape on a book. And this tape is going to prove to be rather difficult to get off. First thing to recognise is that any sticky tape that we use for book repairs will cause a problem in the future. This one's been sticky taped together once before, and this discoloration in the paper is because it was sticky taped once before and the sticky tape goes off. And it's almost impossible to completely get rid of that and repair it so you can't see that. So we would say be very careful. Do not sticky tape. In this case, the top tape they've put on there is only relatively new and is really difficult. It's not going to come off today with me just showing you how to remove some sticky tape. In the middle of this book is the staples. And if you look closely here, you'll see that the staples are very rusty, and the rust of the staples has actually caused the paper to be damaged underneath those staples, and will in the longer term cause much more damage to the work. So the first thing we're going to really look at and make a decision about is this book worth the time to remove the staples, restitch, either stitching with thread or stitching with a stainless steel staple in order to preserve it. In my view, with this particular one, I would say yes, I'm going to want to preserve it. And so what I'm going to do is try and lift the staples, and you should always have done a pre-trial on it to make sure that the particular book that you've got is going to come apart easily. But you can see that we can lift the staple, lift the ends of the staple very carefully, trying very hard not to do any more damage to the paper than what's already been done. And having lifted the two sides of the staple, we will do our very best to be able to remove it. We'll remove one side because the second side is going to be uncooperative. And I'm doing this just with a little bit of pressure, and there's the staple come out at the back. And so we're able to lift that staple, and lifting that staple and straightening it, I'll be able to take the staple back out the other side without too much risk. And actually I've been able to do that with my fingernails. Okay, so we've removed the staple, so we've removed the source of the rust, and rust of course is iron oxide, and any oxide is going to tell you that that's bad news for the conservation of paper. You'll see here that this page was already eaten right through and damaged, and though this staple is still there, it was not holding the top sheet at all. The sheet had worn through, so I will just have another shot of just lifting this one. It's a problem with being on TV, you get nervous. And when you get nervous, things don't quite go the way you expect them to go. Alright, so we've lifted up that staple, removed the staple. Jim. So we've removed our staples and come to the conclusion that the paper in the centre here is damaged enough so that we wouldn't be able to just restaple through there. So the obvious answer would be that we would use some Japanese tissue and put a little piece of Japanese tissue over the top of the cuts to strengthen that side of the paper. Actually, we'll use some that's matching in the colour. Let me just find some Jap tissue that's going to be the right colour. And here it is. Here it is here. Why do these things always come apart easily except when you're on TV? Right, so this is Japanese tissue. The colour is a reasonably close match for what we're doing here. So we'll tear off a small strip or two small strips. And we're going to put these over these holes left by the staples. So this is not really rocket science. It's really a matter of having the courage to decide that you're going to do what you think you need to do, and then embarking upon the process. Generally, we say if you're going to practice on something that doesn't matter, and we're using wheat starch, and using the wheat starch mixed deliberately quite thin, so that we're going to not wrinkle up our tissue too much. Right, so we've put that piece of tissue back. Now, some might say, oh look, I can see that repair. And the answer is, if you want invisible repairs, you should pay a high-class conservator to do so. And that's fine. But often I like to leave a repair I've done in the book, because it may well be that this book will get sold by me later on out of my collection, and people can't say that, oh, I didn't tell them that it had been repaired. It's very obvious. So I leave the repairs being a little obvious in the work that I do. Now, this is going to prove to be somewhat difficult to do a good repair on this front cover, because that's a good one too. Because somebody's already repaired it with the sticky tape. Yes. So I think I'll put a complete piece behind that. And at the same time, we'll just have a look at this piece here. There's a tear here, and I'm going to use another piece of the very thinnest tissue and put it over this torn piece here. Now there is still a piece of sticky tape under that, but I'm not going to sweat too much on that. Right, now here is going to be a join, and this tissue is still going to be a little bit over some of the print, but the tissue is thin enough so that we're not going to worry about being over the top of the text. So we'll just paste this up again with just quite a thin paste, because we don't want it wrinkling up the repair too much. So I'll slide this up here, and we'll pick this up and carefully move it into place over the top of this torn piece. Right now, just carefully lining up the words. Yes, I do need my Teflon folder. Here it is. Right. Okay, so you see now, I put that tissue over there, and even from here, it's quite hard to see that the tissue's gone on. Okay, so we've got the tissue over there that sealed up that gap, the tear, where the staple hole was, and it's overlapped over the type, but we've got no loss of the type because we've used such a thin piece of repair tissue. Now, I would continue to do that, except do it on the other side as well. So now I've done it on the first side, I would put the same tissue on the other side. So it's going to give us 2 layers of tissue there. Thin tissue and thin tissue where there's not going to be any loss of the type underneath. Now I won't do it right now because if I push that down it's going to stick on there, and we don't want it to stick on to that booklet. Now once I've made those little repairs to the paper, then we would actually repair the cover to provide us with enough physical strength to put the cover back on. So on the cover now, we want to use some full strength tissue. So we use our thickest tissue here, and here we go. This is the very thickest tissue. Boy, do I make a mess when I'm working. And we're going to want to tear off a piece here that's going to be about the length. And I'm not even going to bother about flaring the edges and feathering the edges and so on. I'm just going to tear this off so that we've got a reasonable piece of tissue.
Would you do it on both sides?
Sorry?
Would you do it on both sides?
Maybe, but I'm hoping this will give us enough strength so I can actually remove the sticky tape from the other side first. Right? So I'm doing the inside because the outside's got so much sticky tape on it that it's not exactly going to work out well. I'm going to place these as best as I can place them to ensure that when I stick the sticky tape on there, it's going to stick the tissue on there. It's going to provide us with a reasonable join, and you know that other bit of sticky tape is going to get in the way, so I'm going to have to take it out and just cut it because it's not going to let me align it properly. So now we'll go back and align it properly now that we've got that out of the way. Right, so I want that to come fairly well lined up. And like I say, these things are always a lot easier to do when you're not conscious that a lot of people are watching what's going on. Righto. So I'll paste this up again. Oh, sorry about that. I ran out of scrap paper, so I figured I'd use something. So we got a few spare magazines there. And you can see, just by watching me actually paste it, you can see how much stronger this tissue is than the very fine tissue I used before.
So what's in the jar?
That's sorry, this is wheat paste in the jar. Wheat starch paste. Yeah. So, well, not flour and water. No. Straight flour and water makes clag, right? But wheat paste is made with refined clag, right? Which is what this gentleman asked me before. And how do you do it? Isn't that just kids' paste? And the answer is, this could have been a bit of a thinner join than this, but nevertheless, it's my book, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. was a customer's book, you'd have to be thinking very carefully about, oh, that's going to be just a bit too bold. But I want some physical strength in there, and on the front half of the mag, that's going to look all right. Okay, so we've joined that now, and because this is Japanese tissue, there's no grain in the tissue. Right? If there's grain in the tissue, this could wrinkle all over the place. You'd have to be absolutely sure, if you're using plain paper and you wanted to do a join like that, that the grain is running up and down. Otherwise, if it's this way, as soon as you've done this, it's going to go every which way. All right, so we've joined that. Now we've got the basis for straightening out the bits and pieces on the other side. So we can get this little bit and tuck it back into the corner here. See this little bit here? We can tuck this bit back in the corner here. And that's going to join up almost exactly. And this one's going to fill up that little hole there. And so you see we've actually now got a reasonable fix of that side. And it's going to leave this bit here to be fixed up, because we're going to have to get rid of the bit of tape there and the bit of tape there. Because if we don't get rid of them, in another 6 months, a year, 2 years, they're going to start wrinkling and crackling just like the other ones were. All right? So, how would we proceed once we've got that established? Once we've sorted out our book block, we're simply going to stitch backwards and forwards through those the stitch marks there, and so we're going to stitch it and tie it. Then we'd make a decision of, having stitched it and tied it, are we going to stitch it onto the front cover, or are we going to say, look, the front cover's a bit damaged, let's fold some sheets to make an end paper. Not this colour, but fold a sheet to make an end paper. Okay. Tip it on, so we're going to put a little thin bead of glue down there. Tip that into place. It'll be the right size too on this time, right? And now, when we put the cover back on, we can glue this onto the cover, stiffen the cover, provide a hinge, right? And now we're not using a staple to hold it all together. Okay? So that's how you go about a repair, not using those colours, but just as an example of the paper. So that's an interesting little repair of a pamphlet that some might regard as not being worth much. There's another 2 or 3. There's a lot of these available that are in such sort of condition, and you can see that all of them have problems with their staples. All of them have to have the consideration of, are we going to remove the staples, or how we're going to look after that part of it. Let's look at a couple of other little books. I mentioned this book the other day at Bookbinding. It's by a famous author. This is by Alan Quatermain, who wrote all of the Rider Haggard books. And I like Rider Haggard, and I got this one and said, oh, this is great. Oh, look, it's a bit damaged. This one will need me to fix it, right? And then I started to read it first. I got halfway through and found there's 2 sections missing in the middle and 3 pages loose missing other places. So Rider Haggard is not going to get repaired, because in between 20 and 29 there's a whole section missing. One of the most crucial parts in the story is missing. Always. So, but this could be repaired by taking the back cover off, cleaning the spine, removing the junk from the spine, re-gluing the spine, and looking at supporting the leather, which is okay for its age, not bad. But then, you know, it'll stay in my library because this little piece at the front. Right now, Rider Haggard, this went into the library. I've just got to get you the date here. Somewhere in here, there's got a date that it went into the lending library. You know, but 1888 is the age of the book. I would presume that it's in a library binding, so the library's ordered it somewhere around that time. 1888, right? Broken Hill Lending Library. Right, now figure that out. Now just think, what was going on in 1888? Well, there wasn't any women in Broken Hill in 1888. Well, maybe there was some, but not desirable women. But, you know, this was going out to who? I'll almost guarantee this was going in some stockman's pocket to go out on his trip out from Broken Hill to wherever, and came back and was delivered back to the library next time he was back in town, right? And so historically, there's a little bit of something interesting about the book. So I won't repair it, it's not worth repairing. It would be a lot of work for the repair, but it's enough to go, oh, that's an interesting collect, right? This is another little interesting book. I really like this, John Plowman's Children's Talks. They were very famous in their day, 1884. This was given to George Weir, Christmas 1884, in Koroit Lodge. Well, Koroit Lodge, I think, in 1884 was a retirement village, as such as they called them in that day. But I'm not really sure. But nevertheless, a little bit of history. But it's an interesting book because, well, it's got some sections fallen out. Oh, well, we'll repair the sections. This book is really, really interesting because each of these sections is actually stapled. And they were stapled onto the back cloth that's in here. And if we go to the middle, this was not a cheap book, it's gilt-edged, it was a presentation copy. And here it is, the sections have fallen out in the middle, and they were actually stapled onto the back cloth. Now, how you managed to staple all of those pages in there, I can't quite work out. But it's very obvious that the staples are open a little bit, so they've been through that bit of cloth and they've now fallen off the cloth as the cloth has fallen apart. What should you do to repair it? Well, all these staples have got to come out. They'll make great stitching holes, so we'll re-stitch through these holes. We'll check every one of the sections to make sure that there's no damage in the middle of the section, and we'll make sure that we run our stitching thread, so the stitching thread goes out the back where the staple was. It's going to come to there and have the kettle stitch is going to be there, and it's going to be on 3 tapes. No, probably we'll put a little extra kettle stitch just past the end of the staple hole. Right? So it will go back together very nicely, and with the fact that it's got gilt edges, the main part of it is the binding is good and solid here. The cloth is not damaged. Right? It's just that really, I think these staples have been the culprit again. They've caused the glue and the backing to rust with iron oxide as time's gone on. So they're all a little discoloured. It's discoloured in the back of here. That's caused the back to let go. This is going to be a bit of time to re-bind and put back together. It'll be fiddly work because of that, and I haven't yet got it out far enough to know exactly what the spine lining is in here. But I'm reasonably sure it will all come out. These sections are loose here. It will all come out and allow me to put it back together to look at least reasonably pretty and reasonable and readable. I've put a new end paper on here, but only joining the end paper on just a little bit here, so that it's going to have a loose flyleaf there to provide some extra strength but keeping the information. It's John Plowman's Talks. Oh, by the way, this is listed as being in the 100,000 of production. This is common as common, except for the production, the presentation editions. The ordinary Plowman's Talks were in plain paper wrappers, and this one's been put into a very nice cloth. And they would have issued 100 cloth copies for every 1,000 they produced, maybe. Right? So that makes it a little bit rarer than 100,000 makes you think. So it's a very interesting little work, interesting in its time, and quite repairable. Okay. Here's one which is we tend to be the repository in our place. People come past and say, "Oh, I've got all my dad's books, and I don't want them. You know, what do you do? What are you going to do with them? You know?" And so they get dropped on us to decide what to do with. This one's problematical because I won't know until I've actually pulled it apart. But it's obvious that this hinge is damaged here. The end paper's broken. It wasn't put in here terribly well. I've got to cut the cloth to get underway. Then I'll have to remove these sections because you can see they're not really rounded properly anymore. So there's going to be a fair bit of work to fix this. Now, unless this had in the front of it, an inscription, from great grandma, like that one over there's got an inscription. Unless it had something like that, you know, I'd sit and say this is a problem as to whether or not the repair is going to be worth the money. Could I buy a copy on the internet of this in perfect condition for less than the cost of repairing it? So I always advise people to look very carefully at that. Now, it's different when it's great-grandpa's book that he had, because this was great-grandpa who borrowed it out of the library, you know. Then you'd say there's something special about the book that needs it to be repaired, right? And this one will take more than a 10-minute repair to put it back together again. This is another one that's similar. You know, Sundays at Home. Now, this book was issued, like many books of its time, people could not afford to buy the whole book. They bought it by subscription. So it comes to them by parts every week or every month. And so over the year, this has accumulated up 50 parts, and they've got this book, and it's all parts that's been read at home. And it's time to think about what they're going to do with it. Well, if they really liked it, they would put it into a binding. So they would send in and say to the publisher, I want the cover, please. And so the publisher sends out this cover. Sometimes the cover would come automatically. If you bought the whole year's subscription, when the last one of the subscription arrived, the cover came with it. And this cover would have come with, perhaps with the end papers to put in there, perhaps they would be put in by the binder. But this cloth cover would come printed from the publisher. You'd go to your local binder would put it together and then slap the cover over the outside. And it was designed a little bit like the cover's already made, so you're just going to put it over. Now, if you see here, these are the cords which actually support the sewing. So the sewing in the back is on these cords, right? One of them looks like it's missing. There's one down here somewhere I think is missing. Okay, so those cords hang out, and of course, when you're putting the cover on, you would have your end papers underneath there, and so you'd already have a folded end paper. Not really like this, but this will do for the exhibition, right? So we'd have an end cover, an end paper. I'll get up, Jim. Right, and here's the end paper is going to be underneath there. It's going to be tipped into place. That is going to have a little bead of glue about 3 millimeters wide to hold the end cover in place. And so you've done that, it's been bound, and then you're going to get the cover here, and you're going to go, righto, I'll get my end paper, I've got to paste it out, so I will go through and paste out all over the end paper. And then I'll wait just a little bit and I'll check to make sure it's in the right place, and then I'll go pop and check, and the cover's on the right place. And then I'll put a little press on it and it's done. The problem is there's nothing really that secured them to that end wall there bar a little bit of paste. Right? Now, we could put EVA glue on to re-glue them back on there, and that's going to actually be a reasonable support. Right? I would probably on this one remove this and take the remains of the hollow here out, because the remains of this hollow that was put inside, and I would probably use something like a heavy scrim like this, a bit of muslin, and recover the back of the spine with muslin, right, so that we actually had about that much hanging over the spine. And so now I've got the end papers, I've got a good bit of muslin here, right. I would make sure that I use some EVA glue to hold those nice and tightly on the page, and paste a little bit to get this all in place and held together. Now we've got our little cords there hanging onto the muslin, and then we're going to have that muslin hanging onto the back of the spine here, so we've got a lot more attachment. So then I would come along and do the same thing, you know, paste it all up with that end paper, paste up over the muslin, and then line this up nicely and go, there it is, there it is, there it is, get in there and put it on, right? Okay, and so this is actually quite a simple repair. It looks like a disaster repair, but in fact, because the the remains of the cords are there, you know, this will be relatively easy to put some paste on here. So you just get some paste, put some paste on it, will soften the remains of the glue, almost certainly animal glue that's underneath. So you'll be able to paste this up, and then leave it sit there for a little while. Squeeze it up in a little press, and make sure that you've got the shape of it nice and the shape of the front nice. Squeeze it up. I use EVA on the spine, so that now we've put a good coat of EVA on it. I would then use the muslin over the EVA on the spine, sort that out, right? If you wanted to be a bit, no, we wouldn't. We would, having done that, we might decide we want to put a new little end band on there, just a purchased piece of end band. Where is it? Here's a bit. Where'd it go? Here it is. Right, so we're going to get some nice end band there. We can pop that up to dress up the top edge there, because we'll see that edge when it's done, and that just sort of hides the end and makes it look pretty. So you can see that you know, you wouldn't bother to go and actually do a whole hand stitch one. There's not the value in there. Okay, but that would put this book back into a reasonable condition, so that now it's workable, usable, readable, and it's going to stay alive on the bookshelf. You could do, if you really wanted, you could be touching up the edges here with a little bit of dressing up just to re-strengthen those tops. Okay, so that one you'd say, look, for the work that you're going to do, half an hour, especially if it's got grandma or grandpa's name in the front, you're going to do this job. This one, I'd be doing a good search on Google to go and find if I can get another copy of this, or ABE Books, or another good one's adall.com. And you could hunt around on that and see whether or not you could find a copy, and that would be more economical than trying this. So than this one.
Clean up the front. Do you do anything to bring it up?
Well, you really can't do a lot. I would be inclined to have a little look with. You can get some spirit dye, and just go around the back corner and go, look, let me just have a little look here, and get a little bit on a cotton bud and just rub a bit around and have a look. What does it look like? Is it going to dry?
Make it worse, obviously. And
you can make it worse, you see. So, sorry? Well, actually, if you mix it right, it doesn't. It just smooths it over and takes the dirt off the top of it, and then the rest of the colour comes up.
Cars and motorbikes, sometimes using a cleaning agent ruins it.
Ruins it. So you always got to test those things. Yes, always test those things.
You can also just rub it with an eraser to get the surface.
I just do like
That's scrub like that.
These ones.
just a gentle sort of
Yep.
spruce.
One direction to like that.
Okay. Well,
Just a pick up.
so that's removed a little bit of dirt off the spine there. You see, so you can use. There are some water dyes you can use as well that won't lift what's on there. But again, you take. Yeah, you might try and leave it dependent. I've used spirit on a fair few recoveries that I've done, mainly because I just inherited a set of spirit dyes, so I tend to use them a bit, and had reasonable results. But I tend to sort of go, look, nah, I'm not really going to do too much at all. I just leave it. You know? So yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. That'll be our last session for today.